Hello, everybody, and welcome to day 4 of the Feldenkrais Awareness Summit. And if you're just joining us for the first time, my name is Lavinia Plonka, and I have the honor of hosting today. And today is part of our track that we call Somatics at Large. And I'm going to introduce our first speaker in a minute, but first of all, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So first of all, look around your screen and see where or your device, and see where the chat area is. And then we can connect with each other there. It's as simple as just kind of saying hi and where you're from, but that way at least you know what you're doing. And then from there you can kind of delve into what other kinds of questions you might have for our speakers. You can ask what you're wondering about in the interview. And then Arlene Klein, who you don't see, but who is in our background, is going to be available throughout that whole time in the chat area. And just so that you know, if you're watching this on replay, you're not going to be able to do the chat. And then after the interview is over, we're also going to go through the chat and start to maybe interweave some of your questions when we do the live panel at the end of this track. So I'm really, really excited to be introducing to you the guest speaker for today. And her name is Dr. Martha Eddy. And I mean, she has a resume as long as some papers that I've written. It's pretty profound, but I'll just give you a brief amount, and I'm sure she's going to tell you more about herself as we go along. Martha is a registered somatic movement therapist, a teacher of body-mind centering, and a certified movement analyst with a doctorate in movement science. And she's on the faculty of Empire State College, which is part of SUNY. And she also works at Princeton University. She's the founder of the nonprofit organization Moving for Life, as well as the Somatic Movement Therapy Training Dynamic Embodiment. Martha is also the author of this really amazing book. It's called Mindful Movement: The Evolution of Somatic Arts and Conscious Action. And this is something that's really interesting to me because I've always had this little fantasy. I used to say that if everybody in the world would just lie down and do a Feldenkrais lesson at the same time, we would completely change the universe. So Martha has actually taken that into ideas for social action, environmental activism, and that's in this book, as well as an incredible history of how the somatic revolution is moving through our world. But I'm going to let Martha talk about that. So I'd like to, without further ado, introduce you. Welcome, Martha.
Hello, Lavinia. Thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate this opportunity to talk with you and get to know you and also the whole Feldenkrais Summit.
So, I guess you come to somatics from a kind of a different, and that's the whole point of the Somatics at Large kind of track, is looking at, sort of how Moshe Feldenkrais's work has spilled out into the world, but also how other somatic disciplines kind of dovetail around it and relate to it. And so you're like our link by putting it all together into this book. We're looking for insights and ideas. But I guess one of my first questions before we do, I know you have a presentation, before we delve into it, is like, can you tell us a little bit about your journey into somatics? Because I know that you were a dancer and probably still are doing a lot of dancing.
That's true. And it was the pathway of dance that led me into encountering, not planning, two very special women that have been dubbed part of the somatic world. And I say dubbed because when this started, we didn't really use the term somatics. At least, even though Thomas Hanna was starting to use it, they didn't self-identify as doing somatic work. And that's one of the things I loved about Feldenkrais work, was I felt like the Feldenkrais community was one of the first communities to really embrace the term somatic education, along with some of the Traeger folks. So my lineage is that as an undergraduate in college, I was introduced to the Laban Bartenieff work, and was motivated then to study directly with Irmgard Bartenieff. So I was just delighted to be able to be with her about 4 years before she died. And then simultaneously, and this is significant, as an undergraduate, I also met Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen because she had moved from New York City to Amherst, Massachusetts, where I was studying. Now, those of you that are familiar with Feldenkrais may know that Moshe taught in Amherst, Massachusetts as well. So the school that I was at was Hampshire College, and that was the very school that he rented, or the guild or whoever was sponsoring his workshops and his certifications rented. And so I was also very, very lucky to participate and watch, not write notes, but just be with the process of Moshe teaching as well.
I didn't know that about that aspect of your background. Man, that was such a hotbed of movement education there, the whole Hampshire College thing.
Absolutely. We at Amherst said, well, we're the Boulder of the East.
So then you took all of these different influences and kind of put it in your own handwriting, as Moshe would say, and brought it through your process. And I know that you have a little bit of a presentation that you want to give. Is this a good moment for you to do that?
Yeah, it is. I'll say a little bit about my blend because that doesn't come up till the end. Basically, what I'll be presenting is just sort of my process of making sense of the many, many influences that are out there. And my own metaphor is that we are a field, and we are a field of wildflowers, because it wasn't like a sown field, like this row is going to be this. It was just stuff popping up around the world. And then we credit Thomas Hanna for saying, okay, let's call this somatic. So I do want to describe what somatics is. And just biographically to share that both with the Laban work and the body mind centering work, and partially because I was studying both at the same time, I was asked to teach right away in both certification programs. And they were interested in what I knew from the other. And that, I think, is what set me on the path of kind of being a historian of the field, because I wasn't just going down one lineage, I was in two. And so I was curious about them. And it actually wasn't until 3 years into my studies with body mind centering that I realized and learned that Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen had actually studied with Irmgard Bartenieff too. So we were actually from the same lineage. So that's partly what this presentation will talk about, is different lineages and evolutions. So shall I go to screen share?
Absolutely. I am eager to see this.
All right. So here we are. And we go to share, and then I need to go to the slideshow and start it. There we go. So everybody see okay? Okay. Basically, I was asked by the Feldenkrais Summit to speak about East meets West. And one of the things that I have done, and that is in this book, Mindful Movement, I chose to really highlight an article I wrote in 2002 called Global Influences on Somatics and Dance. And so that will come out in this talk. But let's first start talking about what is somatic, just in case any of you are not as familiar with the term, or maybe have been using it for years but not quite sure what its history is all about. So a quick way to talk about it would be the body-mind connection, but that's sort of a cheap, quick soundbite. What is exacting is that the word soma is a Greek word. It is still used today, and it is distinct from the body. So soma and body are both words to describe a body, but the soma is the living body. So as we all know, if we die, we still have a body to contend with. You talk with your family about what you want done with your body. In the case of your soma, it's gone. The living body is the soma. So from that, we infer that there's intelligence in the body. The body is able to heal. It's able to self-regulate. And these are some of the key qualities of somatic education, is tapping into the intelligence of the living body. And how do we do that? We do that by paying attention to the body, meaning our proprioceptive cues. And I'll be talking more about that in a second. And why do we do that? Not just to heal the body or to kind of feel better in our bodies or perform better with our movement, but also because many of us have learned, and this is key in the somatic field, that it affects who we are as thinkers, as creative beings, as decision makers. So that's a big part of this body-mind connection. The body informs the mind is of the body. So somatic tools are working with breath, working with movement, working with touch, working with vibration and vocalization, noticing the use of the voice as part of a movement process. And then what I call conscious dialogue. There's lots of talking that can happen or not in a session. If you're doing either a lesson, you may be cued through language. If you are receiving a private session, a one-on-one, as it might be called, functional integration session in the Feldenkrais work, there's also some dialogue usually between practitioner and client. So I like to emphasize that it's bringing out consciousness. So little pitch on that. And then one of the things we'll get back to today is that many of the somatic traditions or lineages or types of practices have a neuro developmental framework. And that actually leads nicely into talking about things like neuroplasticity, which were words that didn't exist when our progenitors began this work, but we can now reflect on the capacity that movement work they were doing had to really impact the brain and the whole nervous system. So I'll pause there, just check in. I'll go to the next slide just so you see where it's headed, but just anything you want to say?
Well, you know, just an interesting little factoid that I uncovered, and I wish I had it right in front of me, but I dug up the word neuroplasticity and found out that it was coined in 1948 by a Polish scientist, and I can't remember his name. So, you know, it's kind of, it was there floating, but, you know, suddenly for it to become part of our reality, you're absolutely right. It didn't start to come in until these people started to do the work that helped us understand what neuroplasticity might be.
And my experience was people were literally using the word miracle, you know, rather than this is something that the body does,
Right.
if given the right context and the right influences. It was miraculous. What Irmgard Bartenieff did with polio patients in the hospital was miraculous. What Bonnie Bainbridge-Cohen, these are my two teachers, did with babies who had been, you know, had a drowning experience was miraculous. What Moshe did with a woman with only half a brain or half a cerebellum was miraculous. And now we know that it can be systematized. And that's one of the criterion I use for looking at, we'll show a chart of the lineages later, is did the person who found this miraculous aspect of the human body that we all have create a system that could be replicable, that could be taught to others. So let's look at, if you don't mind, some confusions that are out there about the word somatic, because I think that's important. We have this use of the term. We've reclaimed the word soma and then used the adjective somatic, and yet it shows up in other places. So the peripheral nervous system, for instance, which is just the nerves of the body, has two branches. There are the autonomic nerves that go to mostly the organs and glands, and then there are the somatic nerves that go to the voluntary muscles. And so there's a kind of implication there that somatics is more voluntary. And so that's something we have to look at in reframing our work, or reframing the word somatic in relation to our work. And then there's the word psychosomatic, which actually kind of divides the mind and the body, the psyche as the mind part and the soma as the body part. So that can be confusing too, where we're saying somatic means whole body and mind. The term psychosomatic kind of pulls them apart again. And
not only that, but it also has developed a kind of negative connotation in our culture.
Yes, it's like you know, a taboo. You're like, oh, that's just psychosomatic, just psychosomatic. You're just making that up in your mind. And it's not even real in the body.
Right.
That's a good point. And then there are somatic therapies. I said European approaches just because I think they've taken off more there, but the whole psychotherapy can be referred to as somatic psychology, somatic. There can be body-oriented psychologies, and sometimes those are referred to as somatic therapies. But that's a more in line with our school of thought around somatics. So then this is a kind of holistic use of the term somatic. And then there are some art-related uses of the word, but I'll go on from there. Well, how do we get into somatic education? Well, a key word for me I just used was proprioception, and another is kinesthetic. So these are two awarenesses that we are endowed with. And when we're taught about the senses, we're often just taught about the five senses, and then you'll hear about the sixth sense, and then there'll be a little bit of joking. So we know this is eyes, ears, taste and touch, skin, but then smell, but then the sixth sense. So, well, is that ESP or is that the body sense? And so I think my next, there it is. This is a fun slide. I've decided that one way to get at the fact that we have a lot of other internal senses that tell us about ourselves, that give us more somatic awareness, is to go beyond like the five senses and the six to just say, okay, let's say there are 10. Because when we're teaching children, we can talk about these five and let's talk about five more. So the language I use here is kind of more childlike. Most kids know the word tense or they're learning it. Body shape is certainly known. Standing up tall is something that we can work with. Stopping and starting, you can certainly hear your parents say, stop, okay, let's go. And tilting and falling. So for those of you involved in this field, you would know that tension and body shape are more proprioceptive. They're feeling our own bodies through our muscles, through the receptors in our muscles telling us, are they tight or are they loose? And body shape is more in our joints. Is it stretched or is it folded? So those are the proprioceptives. The three others are trying to get at more kinesthetic awareness and the use of the inner ear in particular, but the combination of the graviception that happens in the body, standing up tall in relationship to gravity, the otolus of the ear letting us know when we're accelerating and decelerating, and the labyrinths of the inner ear helping us with falling and catching our falls, tilting, being off vertical. There's a lot more to say, but this is really important, I feel, to our work, is really understanding these senses. When I say our work, and I include the Feldenkrais community with, for instance, the Body Mind Centering community, the Laban Bartenieff community, the Traeger, Mentastics work, they are movement-based. And actually, most somatic work is movement-based. I said it's a tool. And yet in somatic psychology, the movement might be that which is done seated while talking. So really taking a gesture and really exaggerating it or slowing it down to find out what it's meaning for that person at a psychological level. And then somatic body work would be a session that's really focused on the changes of tissue in the body, but with consciousness, not just for relaxation and pleasure, which is not a bad thing, by the way, but to go deeper, to learn from it, but with less focus on the transition off the table and moving. So that just helped me organize the work, that there are these branches. And again, movement is huge, and so is perception. And perception is the processing of both external, the five senses, and internal, the other proprioceptive interoceptors, exteroceptors, interoceptors of sensory information. What do we do with that information? That becomes our perception. And with that, we then have a multifaceted experience of the physical experience of the sensory. The perceptual might include an emotional reaction, the cognitive, a thought about it, the aesthetic, something creative, and even the political. So this is how I tie in to social action and social justice as well. So back to this slide, I'll pause for a second.
Well, if you go back actually to the slide that you were just showing, it was reminding me of how Feldenkrais spoke about the fact that there are always four things going on, right? Movement, thinking, sensing, and the emotions, right? So when you say multifaceted, to me, political becomes this mixture of, emotions and the mental, all of these things that you've listed kind of fit within those four categories in one way or another into, I guess, what you call perception. And perception also is very much a term that's being used right now in emotional studies, emotional brain studies. So kind of interesting.
Absolutely. Perceptions. My own doctoral thesis was on the role of physical activity. I had to broaden it. It wasn't just somatic work. in violence prevention, specifically in education in schools.
Mhm.
And perception is basically where bias and prejudice and
Right.
intolerance lives.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I loved what you said about the politics, sort of bringing it together, because again, what is politics unless you take action? So in a way, you interpret these things, and then you have some choices that you've made.
Hmm.
Yeah, great. So, excuse me. I like to talk about the sensory motorcycle. It's sort of funny. And again, this is just reviewing what I've been saying, but that information flows in from our sensation. And in the BMC work, we literally teach that the sensory motor neurons live in the back of the spinal cord, and that the motor neurons are more housed in the front of the spinal cord. And so they come in the back and out the front. So the idea is we take information in through our ectoderm, through that layer of brain and skin and the spinal cord, and then we need to make choices with it. And so that is our motor response. Now, some of those choices are very reflexive and without much perceptual interpretation, and others are highly nuanced and thought about through the motor cortex, but also through other levels of the brain. So I just wanted to review that sensations come in through the interoceptors, which include proprioception and kinesthesia, but also we are constantly in touch with the exteroceptors. Even in the somatic world, we care about touch and smell and taste and hearing and seeing, and we use them in what I call kind of collaboration or confirmation of knowledge. I have a doctorate in education, and this whole idea that you learn something, but it's when you, and we kind of know this from sales and marketing too, when you hear it from another source, and then maybe even from a third or a seventh, then it goes, oh, this is real. I'm hearing it in enough different ways that I value it. And so we do that with our senses. Babies do it. You know, they see their thumb, they think it's cute, they move it, they go, oh, I kind of feel that. The proprioception comes on, but it's not till they bite it and taste it and really shape around it that it's like, oh, that's my thumb.
Mm.
And then, of course, bringing it to language is a whole other piece of it. And then what about movement? Well, movement is our response to these perceptual interpretations of sensation. And it's also necessary in actually making choices about what we're going to take in sensorially. If we don't turn our heads, we don't see the butternut squash that I'm now looking at in my kitchen, or we don't see that it's getting cloudy outside. So these are really important. We need to move to sense. And Bonnie Cohen writes a beautiful little 2-page or maybe 4-page article called The Action in Perceiving. So she does perceiving and action and perceiving, 2 chapters of her book in sensing, feeling, and action. So again, we need the nervous system to become aware of any of this. And that's a big part of what I feel we do in somatic education, either in classes or in one-on-ones, is just to help amplify the turning of the mind toward the body in order to sensitize.
I'm just having this impression as you're speaking of how this is all going on at once. It's not like, input, output, but the information is flowing. I love the word flowing, so that there's this constant experience of, things flowing in, impression and expression kind of going all the time. And so I kind of like the motorcycle.
Thank you. Yeah, it's fun. So, and again, just quick on the nervous system, the central nervous system includes the brain and spinal cord. The brain has many parts we are not going to go into today, although if questions come up, I'm open to them. And it's considered a kind of control center. It processes and interprets information. And then if people are dancing, for instance, or playing an instrument, how is the brain being used? Is it on a more automatic level, or is it on a really volitional level, or someplace in between where the emotions, the limbic system are coming in? And yeah, all our nerves. One of the things I think is really important about the somatic work, and this is where it begins to be East meeting West, is that we probably would use different language between somatic and autonomic nerves, or even voluntary and involuntary. So those are synonyms. The autonomic is also referred to as involuntary nervous system, and the somatic is referred to as the voluntary nervous system. Well, there is a truth to that, that there's a way in which if I choose to pick up this glass, that was a choice, and I used my muscular system, my skeletal muscular system to enact that behavior. Meanwhile, my heart was beating the whole time, and I didn't have to think about that. I didn't have to tell my heart, please turn on, please turn off, please don't turn off. So that is autonomic, that is automatic, it is involuntary. And yet, one of the ways that I believe that we moved into the world of miracles is because our work speaks to what is involuntary within this, the musculoskeletal system, meaning some of our reflexive, startling responses, for instance, and what is accessible and voluntary within our autonomic nervous system, meaning that we can slow down our breath by choosing to calm ourselves down. We can slow our heart rates. And it was the yogis in India and other great shamans around the world that were beginning to do that. And it was our amazing, genius, Western somatic founders who were studying sciences, but were also open to these ideas, and often because they had direct influences from Eastern and or African or global South influences. Shall we look at that?
Sure.
Okay, so just to review, somatic movement uses movement to gain awareness. It can help in breaking injurious habits or just habits you don't want. It also brings us to learn to think differently or just start to think differently. And it can be an inroad to creative process. And I can vouch for that as a dancer. So here's a version of a chart. In my book, I use a slightly different one in black and white, but this one pops out a little bit more. So I'm showing it to you. Someone just texted me, she wants to use it in her master's thesis and had to ask for permission, which was great. And that is what I ask. I'm happy to share it, but I do ask that I get cited. She said, what are the different colors? What are the significance of the colors? So this first row that has the more purple color, I think, can you see my arrow scrolling here?
Yes,
Great.
I can.
Okay, so this darker purple is what I call the first generation. So we've got 8 people: Mabel Todd, Moshe Feldenkrais, Irmgard Vartenieff, F.M. Alexander, Milton Traeger, Charlotte Selver, Ida Rolf, and Gerda Alexander. The order is not significant. It had more to do with how I kind of traced the lineage down. And from my conversation with you, Lavinia, one other day, I do want to move Moshe to another spot so we can make room for more of his influences.
Mm-hmm.
I also had the great privilege when I was in Amherst of studying with Ruthie Alon in the 70s and 80s. And she, of course, has Bones for Life and probably some other trainings and should be listed here. I also, because I do much work with children with cerebral palsy and other kinds of serious illnesses, got to know Anat through some of the occupational therapists that were working with some of the same children. So her work should certainly be depicted here. And you're helping me to flesh that out. And obviously one page may be a little tricky, but we'll find a way, we will, to get everybody there. The main point of this chart is to say there were this first row, and then there are people that started to create different programs in this second kind of multicolored row, but didn't necessarily begin their own professional training in somatic movement. So that's there, but the next generation in more pink are the ones that did start their own training. And that's Nancy Topf, that works with Top for releasing work, but also she was called the pelvis lady or the psoas lady because she really focused on that. Joan Skinner, Skinner Releasing, Anna Halprin, Life Art Process with her daughter Daria, Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, Body Mind Centering, Chandra Frawley, East West Somatics, and a couple other names for some of her branches of her work, Emily Conrad's Continuum, Elaine Summers' Kinetic Awareness, and then Judith Aston Patterning. So Judith coming out of the Ida Rolf lineage, Elaine working with Carola Speeds and Charlotte Selver. So I tried to line people up a bit. You'll see Sandra Frale and Anna Halpern were both influenced heavily by Moshe, together with Thomas Hanna. And so they really show up right closer to Feldenkrais. I am in this fourth generation, which I call the amalgam generation, which is when people start to blend knowledge from different groups. And that had started even in the second generation. Certainly Ilana Rubenfeld's work is one example of putting together Alexander with Feldenkrais. The reason she's in green is because she took it in the direction of body psychotherapy. The reason Linda Hartley is half purple and half green is she does both as well. She's a somatic movement therapist with her own training program based in the body-mind centering work, but also went on to be very much a proponent of somatic psychology with a book written with that title. So I think that may be enough. Marion Rosen is another person who was a physical therapist that did touch work, but ended up using it as an entry point together with breath, having studied directly with Gindler, to talk about issues and feelings. So this shows you how integrative our work can be. Any questions about that before I go on, or thoughts?
No, just like how huge it has become, and yet we're still a drop in the bucket of the entire planet, right? I mean, when you look at this, and then all the other branches of other people that are doing things that didn't make it to the chart, you would think that everyone is doing some form of somatic work at this point. It's awesome. Thank you for this chart.
Well, you're welcome. I have to thank my husband. He's an architect, and he said, "Gotta have a visual. Let's make a good visual." And I really learned from him, because it's what people ask for. May I use your chart? And again, I'm happy to share it. I do update it, so that's why I'd like people to check in with me before sharing it. I also want to bring attention to these sidebars.
Exactly.
On another version of the chart, the one that I usually share, there's more across the top, but that's harder to see in the PowerPoint. So just looking, again, this East-West, this is a lot of Western influences with a little bit of East. So Delsarte, and Carl Jung, Rudolf Steiner, Wilhelm Reich, Merleau-Ponty, Isidore Duncan, Dalcroze, very much people that were thinking along these terms and may have influenced one or more of either the first or second generation in particular, or being resurrected by the third generation, which is kind of cool too. John Dewey, someone who studied with F.M. Alexander and writes a foreword to at least one of his books, and really espouses experiential education, is now, so there are many people that are influenced by somatics that don't even know it. Everybody doing constructivist learning and education, everybody who has a child make a decision in a classroom, is actually influenced by John Dewey's experience of the Alexander technique. So that to me is very potent. Leo Koffler was really important in this kind of, I've lost my mouse, but the Elsa Gindler lineage. And of course, I've written Delsarte on both sides, because he really was talking about what you said so beautifully, expression. So impression to expression, and really worked with that. And then Freud, very much the mind state that you could bring your unconscious to consciousness is part of our work. And obviously the body is a tool for that Freud must have understood somewhat, because his daughter, Anna Freud, literally looks at the physiological functioning of the body to name some of the phases beyond even the oral and anal phase of Freud. So very important linkages there. And Jacobson, one of the first to talk about progressive relaxation, again, taking from the process of getting into savasana and yoga and really relaxing the body in a very constructive way, in a very systematic way. It's kind of taking inventory, something that I think we all do in the somatic work from time to time. Then I must bring up Catherine Dunham, who had her doctorate as an anthropologist in dance, and really went into the Afro-Haitian roots of American dance, and in particular, it might link to African dance here on this continent in the United States, and or Afro-Caribbean dancing and or jazz dance. So really important scholar that influenced many of us. And then judo brings us back to Moshe Feldenkrais. I just love that he wanted a nonviolent way, or just maybe because he wasn't allowed to hold a gun, to to stave off attackers. I mean, there really were Palestinian experience, and the beginning of the Israeli state was, and obviously still is, a hard time when it comes to war and different kinds of conflict. And so to learn something like judo, where you could be reflexively responsive and also then help to direct someone's energy so that you could be in dialogue with them, is really important, which, by the way, is what Aikido is. It was developed more in the 40s, and it was developed to be a way to go with the energy of an attacker and settle them so that you could kind of give them a minute to knock some sense into them without knocking them at all, but to just say, I've got you under my control at the moment. Is this really what you want? Rather than having to hurt them. So these all tie into the somatics a lot. And I'm more than happy to go into more detail about the Eastern influences.
Yeah, well, as you were, I was thinking about the Aikido influence and, looking at the chart and going, well, it's not so much there, but there's the whole world of, Richard Straussy Heckler's coaching work that has become, ontological coaching and all that. That's a whole other branch of, I think some of those people actually call themselves somatic coaches, which you're going to have to make another chart to go off in that direction. Exactly. And even some of the psychotherapies like Hakomi is very much influenced by some Aikido principles. So, I'm looking at this and going, yeah, let's go deeper into this East meets West thing. I'm ready for the next slide.
I love it. And I do want to say that when you brought up the kind of the breadth of our impact of somatics, that was what was on my mind, but I didn't get to say it, which is the coaching world. And I'm being drawn into it more and more through the whole embodiment conference. So there are people that are talking about embodiment and not necessarily using the word somatic. And that embodiment world seems to be a wonderful bridge of somatics, those people that, kind of really identify with the word because of some of this lineage as outlined in this chart, and things that are missing from the chart, but then also the martial arts themselves and the types of psychotherapies that have maybe been rooted more in Reich, but didn't come through the somatic movement lens.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And in one of our tracks, actually, Elizabeth Berenger is one of the speakers who is like a 900th degree black belt in Aikido, as well as a Feldenkrais trainer. And she's actually going to be addressing this in some ways as well. Aikidoists and Feldenkrais go together a lot.
Yeah. And I have to say, I was, again, divine providence. There I was living in Amherst, and Len Cohen is an Aikidoist, a black belt, and he was teaching. And in the process of teaching a little bit of anatomy as a chiropractor, he also would give Aikido classes. And I took a few of his, but I can't remember if his was what led me to go to Smith College, which was just one town away from Amherst in Northampton, and study with a Japanese woman who was teaching Aikido at Smith College. Cool. And I was so lucky. So I started Aikido in about 1976, and it's very much a big part of my life. My own teacher, Imaizumi Sensei, is here in New York, and he kind of extricated himself from the politics of Aikido because there are two lineages there, and is mostly teaching Budokan and doing work with the Jo and the Boken, but quite a philosopher, and I feel very privileged to have studied under Imaizumi Sensei. Okay, I'm going to see if I can move this forward. Yes, there we go. All right. So this is my extrapolation of what was central to all the somatic movement systems. So I just want to take a moment for it. And to say that it relates a lot to the parasympathetic nervous system. So within the autonomic nervous system, we have that which moves us into fight flight, just automatically adrenalized cortisol related world. And then the calming down, the place of nurturance, the place of rebuilding, healing from wounds, taking time to get stronger after a workout, whatever it might be. And so when I looked at these, there were about 36 systems I was looking at when I started this study in about 1998, 2001, somewhere in there, to really say, well, what's common about all the somatic systems? These were the ones I found. There's a slowing down in order to pay attention to the body, to feel the body. And feel is a funny word. It implies both touch and emotion. So you can do with it as you like. And that with that, one of the ways to slow down and one of the major interventions is to deepen the breath, deepen the exhalation, let go of the holding of the breath, which is so much a part of the fight-flight response. And with that, it can be helpful to lie down, whether it's on a table, on the floor, sit back in chairs, to release tension as a beginning place. It's certainly not where most of us want to stop, but it is a starting place for this kind of reevaluation of habit and to just kind of let go for a bit. You can also do it seated upright or standing, and the Alexander technique does more of that, but they have table work as well.
Right. And Ruthie Alon's processes, a lot of them are done in the vertical.
Mm-hmm.
So
I have created an exercise program for people with cancer. It started with women with women with breast cancer. And because cancer is so hard on the joints, especially the aromatase inhibitors, the I'm sorry, I think we might need to pause. I've got a message coming on. I thought I had turned it off. Should I just talk over it?
Just keep talking.
Great. Sorry, everybody. So just letting you know that I had the take on Laban movement analysis, and I thought we were the only people that really cared about space and 3 dimensions. And so we go forward and we go back and we go side, right and left and up and down. And of course, when I started studying carefully what everybody else was doing, it was all dimensions for everyone, you know, whether it's starting lying down and then transposing the Feldenkrais lesson to standing, which is so important. Or as I was saying with the breast cancer work, we do the whole class standing, but it's completely somatic-based fitness.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't go to the floor because it's uncomfortable to go to the floor in
Exactly.
that. Yeah. And then, but what's really critical, and I feel that Moshe's work really made this clear right from the beginning. And I had to sort of find it myself in the body mind centering and the Bartenieff work. It's a term that I see Glenna Batson, who has her PhD in physical therapy, but is also an Alexander technique practitioner as well as an ideokinesis maven, calls novel coordination. And so it's looking for learning new things. And in the process of learning, here we get to that word neural plasticity, the opening up of new neural pathways.
Mm-hmm.
So these were the bottom line. Sometimes I call them 5, sometimes I call them 4, but components of somatic work in my humble estimation. There are obviously other elements, but these seemed really core. So there it is. We're going to proceed through here. Again, here's our first generation. I think we've gone over them already. Different ones were influenced by different somatic, I won't say trauma, but challenges. So in the case of F.M. Alexander, the loss of his voice. In case of Gerda Alexander, problems with breathing. In case of both Irmgard and Moshe, the diaspora, having to escape persecution of being Jewish. And in Moshe's case, also being told he might not walk again after his knee and different kind of leg injuries. Ida Rolf, I'm saying she didn't seem to have a particular challenge, but she was influenced by yoga very early on. Charlotte Selber, also part of that diaspora from Germany, and Mabel Todd, breath and walking problems. And then Milton Schrager was more based in performance issues. He wanted to be a better boxer, and he had body work as an athletic trainer, and then he ended up helping that trainer by saying, you know, I would like you to touch me in this way. And he lay down and he did a different quality of touch than the typical massage. And the trainer said, oh my gosh, you're onto something. Please keep this going. So that's pretty wonderful. Of quick photos, FM Alexander. Gerda Alexander, who we don't often hear about, Utoni, worked with really some deep understanding of accessing the depth of the marrow of the bones for change, and also getting rid, Utoni means harmony in tonus of the body, getting rid of spasticity. And here's Milton Traeger, who does movement in the form of Traeger mantastics and touch with the Traeger approach. And he talked about freer, lighter, softer. So now, Eastern influences. In the case of Frederick Matthias Alexander, he was born down under. He was born in Australia. So it's a stretch. I haven't really heard stories, but I have read that his niece thought he was one of the most spiritual people in the world. You know, where did that come from? Well, he definitely had an illness as a child, sensitivity from that. But also, you know, growing up in the outback may have had some kind of influence on him. And I'd love to learn more about that. Gerda Alexander thought she was going to go to off to someplace very warm and ended up by accident in Denmark. Kind of story. And Irmgard studied Qigong in Hawaii as part of her kind of sabbaticals for many years. I say later in life because it was more in the 60s and 70s. It wasn't an early influence. Moshe being the first European to earn a black belt in judo, among the first. Ida Rolf talking about yoga. Charlotte Selver studied Eastern meditation with a lot of the great teachers. And Mabel Todd, just through the work of breath, maybe more straight kind of US American waspy, but so I don't know of any European influences there, Eastern Europe, Eastern or African or down under influences with her. And then similarly with Milton, he may have traveled as part of his international sport, but I don't know. So these are the influences from the West also that sometimes get lost. That I have a whole chapter written by Kelly Mullen, who was a student that I helped support through her master's thesis. And I said, well, you know, this is important information. It should get out there. And it's basically, I'm looking for the page, and I'm sorry, when I was flipping through pages earlier, you heard me. Chapter 4, European antecedents to somatic movement. So really looking at the very early work of Franz Nachtigall in Denmark as early as 1777, and then Peter or Per Ling in 1776 in Sweden, and then Jan in Germany in 1778, and in Switzerland, Claes in 1782. This is the beginning of what was called the physical culture movement or the movement cure. So it's really important, especially through the Delsarte and Stebbins lineage, which affected and may have influenced Mezendijk and Gindler, who are all these precursors to some of the somatic work. Certainly,
not to mention Duncan and even Martha Graham. I mean, our whole world of modern dance was influenced ultimately by Delsarte and Genevieve Stebbins.
You got it. So there's that. So I just wanted to name that. It's important for those of you who are interested to know that that information is out there. So here's a picture of Delsarte, here's Stebbins, and here's Dalcroze, who does Eurythmics. And so teaching children as well as adults to learn about music through the process of feeling the rhythmic responses of the body. And Rudolf Laban was very much coming out of some of that lineage as well, creating a dance notation, but also movement analysis. And with that movement analysis, we have a language for movement. And the way that I find that the Laban work is taught best is really through the lens of Irmgard Bartenieff, who said, we've got, and he certainly, Laban did this too, with Mary Wigman and with Kurt Joost, you have to move it to understand these quality changes, these dynamics, these spatial dynamics as well. And so very much through the process of embodied learning, coming into some of the kind of work we do today. And then we have the second generation who also were influenced by the East, but also by the first generation. So Anna Halprin, very much affected by Moshe. And then in her case, more affected by growing up in Chicago and then being in the Bay Area, maybe more through the Duncan lineage, wanting to really, she did some of the first interracial modern dance in the country. Elaine Summers, more from that Eastern European lineage, but very much a meditator and a thinker. So I would like to know more about what might have influenced Elaine to be the brilliant both performer, intermedia, first person to work with film and dance together. Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen is where I began to dig into, and with Emily Conrad, dig into what were these influences from the East. Bonnie had lived in Japan, and she is known for not only recognizing that, through our breath that we can slow our heart rate, but more that we can literally feel, and I'm going to tilt a little bit down so I can see my hand here, just feel the volume of the heart as a support for the musculoskeletal container. So we say the contents helps to give life, both for movement initiation, but also for movement and postural support. So that's organ support. And so the idea, when I was teaching this work in the 80s, I got quoted in New York Woman magazine. And she's like, really feel into your kidneys? What does that mean? And they just really didn't get it. But so she was groundbreaking in getting us to feel we could initiate movement from the volume of our organs, from feeling and sensing the proprioception of our inner body. That now doesn't seem so amazing at all. And there are many people in the East really uplifting her influence directly in Japan, where she worked in Katsen Gunundo and the work of Noguchi. So in that case, he was doing what he called a kind of releasing and recalibrating of the autonomic nervous system through a dance of the nervous system itself, letting it unwind, if you will. To me, it's a little bit like cranial sacral unwinding. So I was interested in that, and my first article on that was in Dance Research Journal, talking about her understanding of the Japanese Katsen Gunundo and how it influenced her realizing that one could feel the organs and move from the organs. Then similarly, Emily Conrad would just occasionally speak about, but not really a lot, her roots of how she got into this amazing flow and fluidity of the continuum process, which helps, again, miracles of people who are highly spastic finding movement choice and movement range, muscular range. And it turns out she had studied with Catherine Dunham, and she had gone and lived in Haiti, and she was there under the dictatorship, but she wanted to be there to dance. And so as a white woman, learning the dances of Haiti was really important, and learning about Vandaloo and learning about the Orishas and the different goddesses, and taking that into her body, and then finding a way to take it into a healing process that was relatable for, kind of the US American and now worldwide public.
Yeah, I'm going to jump right in here because we're running out of time. I can't believe it. It just flew. But, this relationship of Emily Conrad's Haitian influence, and, you were talking a little bit about the whole relationship to somatics and how it's moving into Africa, African influence, not just East meets West, but that part of the planet as well. And I don't know whether you want to just jump into maybe giving us a little bit of that before we wrap up. And wasn't Emily Conrad also wounded and ill? And that was what helped her process of developing continuum. So again, we've got this trauma that leads to a somatic experience, right?
One of the things I like to talk about the second generation is, if you'll notice, they're all women. And
yeah.
And they're all dancers, every single one of them. And one of the things that I feel really came alive with the second generation, not that it wasn't there with the first, and Marion Rosen might be one real kind of connector, which is why I give her like a little connector place in my book, is that they really embrace the emotional life. And so for Emily, it was that she had a very traumatic childhood. And so I'm not aware of a physical trauma, but she speaks to emotional trauma.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so each of these women allow, Joan maybe the least in a sense, but hers is more metaphoric work. And so from there, it certainly can express emotion, and it goes into dance and emotional expression there. And Judith Aston's work is now a little bit more related to everyday life and corporate life, as well as fitness. And yet I'm sure she has her roots actually studying with Juana de Laban at UCLA, and very much taught some of the early Laban, taught a lot of people like Tom Myers and the Rolf community about the Laban work. And you can't do the Laban work, you can't really study the effort shape component, which is the dynamics of movement component, without stirring up your emotional life. Because when you go strong quick, you're punching strong quick direct, and when you're going light, sustained, and indirect, you're floating. And so it takes you through a range of emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that. In terms of the influences of Africa, what I know is that the global South has been important. What's come up from South America is important. It's part of the European diaspora. The Jewish people that weren't even accepted into the US or chose to go into Latin America or Central America, brought some of that influence and then did other things with it. And I have to say that Brazil has the most PhDs in dance who have a somatic background in it than anywhere in the world.
Wow.
And Mexico City has the most dedicated buildings to the research. I'm not sure what just happened here. The research of our work. So they have a dance building dedicated, and they have visual arts and the others, and then a whole building for the research of the arts that the government pays for. And there you'll find Laban notators and Laban movement analysts and language of dance people and somatic awareness people. So it's just like we need to know. And I feel that way about Taiwan as well. Mm-hmm. There's just a hotbed of of new thinking going on. There's something called Somatic Educators of Asia. And we need to really get together and allow their leadership to speak to us and show us both our history and some new places.
Well, this is like a perfect moment for us to come to this place of where you can learn more. I don't know if you can unshare.
Sure.
At this point, to realize that you've just only touched on the surface of what's in this book. I'm holding the title wrong here, but it's mindful movement. And the other thing is that if you want to know more about Martha and her work, you just go to feldenkraissummit.com, and there's all the information about Martha's work, about where she's doing things right now, as well as how to get a hold of this book. So, and speaking of that, Martha, I don't know if you want to say anything as we're wrapping up in terms of things that you're doing or workshops that are happening that people might be interested in.
Sure, thank you. Well, one thing is I was president of ISMETA I was on the board for 15 years and president for a chunk of that time. Mm-hmm. And I just want everybody to know they're so invited, either as associate members or as professional registrants, to apply to.
I'm a member.
Yay, great. And so ISMETA is doing its first joint conference with National Dance Education Organization. So it's going to be where somatics meets dance. And it's in New York City, June 21st to 23rd. It's filling up fast. So if you're interested, get online and check that out. I teach dynamic embodiment, which is a blend of body, mind centering and Laban Bartenieff work. And I mostly have advanced learners coming, and they're already certified in either BMC or Alexander or Feldenkrais or Laban movement analysis. But I do open up some of the intensives for visitors too. And I'll be in I was going to say Japan, that's funny. I will be in Ireland, in Cork, from July 8th to the 12th. And then on the 13th, we're going to have an open exchange symposium as well. So that would be lovely. And that's obviously, we have dynamicembodiment.org or drmartheddy.com, but also at the summit, I believe those links are all there.
They are.
I wanted to just show I thought that this might be a way to kind of look at what the book's about. So it basically is 3 phases: the influences and development of somatic education, which is what we've been talking about today, the emergence of somatic movement education and therapy, and really finding how we as a community want to exchange with one another through Ismeta and other ways, and then current trends, which does get into the neuroscience, social somatics, how we can really give back to the community and look at systemic oppression and see how we can be of help there. And then, as you mentioned, the chapter on somatic dance and environmental activism,
Right.
which actually leads into a little subsection on, is this spirituality? Because for some people, connecting with nature has been, or connecting with their body in a deep way, has been a way to connect with what I could easily just say is more right brain sensitivity, just being kind of more holistic. If you read Jill Bolte Taylor,
Right.
You really go, oh, it's a part of my brain where I just am loving and caring of all people. And then ending with just some more kind of thoughts about research and where we need to go. So speaking of research, the last thing I'll be doing, and this is exciting to me because I think I'll be with quite a few other people from the Feldenkrais community. I'll be at the Movementis conference in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my first time going to Israel. So
right. I saw that on the list. Congratulations. That's going to be really exciting. So, and I feel like we could have like 5 different interviews with you, Martha, because you're such a font of information and knowledge, and we've just barely scratched the surface. And I loved that your own book, you have dog-eared and put all those little notes there as if you're continuing to research yourself as you continue going. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So, and as we wrap up here, I just want everyone to know that this replay will be available within a couple of hours, and then it's going to remain available for 48 hours for free. And of course, if you can't take it all in, and who could watch all of these videos all the time, you have the opportunity to upgrade to the All Access Pass. While the summit is still in progress, you'll get a $25 discount. Mm-hmm. And also, I think that you are offering a bonus recording. Martha's offering a bonus recording in the exploration, in the bonus area. So thank you for that. Mm-hmm. And, I just hope to see you all next. I think our next speaker is Larry Wells. And it's going to be a wonderful opportunity to continue exploring somatics at large. Thanks again, Martha. And I look forward to meeting you in person someday.
Likewise. What a pleasure. You are also a font of connectivity. Really, just everything I
Right. Well, when I come to New York, we'll talk.
That will be great. We will talk.
All right. Bye.